Today, I'm showing you the 3 most insane wedding dress sabotages I've ever seen, and trust me, this is not exaggerated. In the first wedding, the bride's dress was destroyed with a glass of red wine. But it was not an accident. And yes, we have proof. In the second one, the mother-in-law didn't just criticize the dress. She grabbed scissors and turned the most expensive lace in Arizona into shredded confetti. And the third, buckle up. Because this one is so unbelievable, even we struggled to accept it. The mother-in-law actually wore the bride's dress the night before the wedding and destroyed it, trying to squeeze herself into it. These 3 stories are real, and each one is more unhinged than the last. So take a breath, because if you think you've seen monster-in-laws before, you haven't seen anything yet. Let's get into the video. Before we begin, I want you to imagine standing in a quiet bridal suite, the air heavy with perfume and nerves. You lift the dress bag expecting beauty, relief, maybe even a little peace for the bride. But instead, you find damage intentional, targeted, humiliating. That moment of silence before the bride realizes what's happened, that's the part that stays with you. It's the pause before the storm, the breath before the unraveling. And today, you're going to experience that storm 3 times. These stories escalate. Each one reveals something more manipulative, more calculated, more unhinged than the last. If you think one mother destroying a wedding dress is unbelievable, wait until you see what the next one does with scissors. And then what the last one does with a zipper. So take a breath, settle in. Because we're about to step into a world where perfection is an illusion. Control is a currency, and a single dress can expose the darkest parts of a family. Tell me, if you walked into a room and found a bride's dress destroyed, would you believe it was an accident? This is where it begins. I walked into the bridal suite expecting a simple temperature check. You know the moment, soft music, steamed from curling irons, someone laughing too loudly out of nerves. But instead, the room felt frozen. The air was thick, the kind of thick that tells your instincts to brace before your mind even understands why. And then I saw it. Lauren stood in the center of the room, shaking, her hands hovering over the fabric like she was afraid to touch it. Her wedding dress, the one she'd picked after 2 months of fittings, the one she'd paid for entirely on her own to avoid owing anything to her future mother-in-law, was drenched in red. Not pink, not faded. Bright, bold, impossible to ignore red, the kind that stains silk forever. The color had spread across the bodice in jagged waves like a violent signature. A wine glass lay on the floor, tipped over and rolling slightly every time someone shifted their weight. And beside it stood the woman herself, perfectly composed, tilting her chin with a theatrical sorrow that didn't match the situation at all. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "I can't believe this happened. I tripped. I really did." Her voice was too smooth, too steady, too prepared. Lauren finally looked up at me, eyes swollen, makeup streaked, her chest trembling. "Emily, she didn't trip." That was the moment everything inside me stilled. Because when a bride says something like that quietly, almost apologetically, you know you're about to hear a truth that will unravel the entire wedding budget, the emotional investment, and every fragile agreement holding the families together. I moved closer, inspecting the dress like it was a crime scene. The stain pattern was strangely controlled, almost targeted, soaking only the front panel where the fabric was most delicate. A real trip would have sent wine in multiple directions. This looked poured, directed, and despite having supposedly stumbled, the monster-in-law didn't have a single drop on her dress. Not one. Sometimes I wish I could pretend moments like this surprise me, but after years in this industry, you learn to read sabotage the way a doctor reads an X-ray. The financial pressure, the unspoken resentments, the power dynamics simmering beneath the surface, they always give themselves away in tiny details. And this room was full of them. I crouched down to help Lauren steady her breathing, but she was already spiraling. "This dress cost me 3 months of savings," she whispered. "I skipped so many things just to afford it, and she knew that." Her voice cracked, and I felt that familiar mix of anger and clarity settle in my chest. I had seen mothers attack brides through budgets, guest lists, rehearsal dinners. But the dress, that was different. The dress is the heart of a wedding's emotional economy. Destroying it is never impulsive. It's a message. I gently asked what happened, and Lauren's bridesmaids exchanged a look before stepping aside, revealing the small table behind them. 2 wine bottles, both unopened when I'd last checked the suite that morning, now had one missing a quarter of its contents. And the cork was sitting neatly beside it, not in the trash, not rolling on the floor, placed carefully, almost ceremonially. "Tell me you see this too," I whispered to myself. Honestly, I needed the reassurance. Because this wasn't clumsiness, it was choreography. One of the stylists leaned in, lowering her voice. We heard the woman say she wanted to test the lighting on the dress, and then she insisted on giving a toast. 5 hours before the actual rehearsal, my stomach tightened. That was a classic tactic: create a pretext, design a moment, then play innocent when the damage unfolds. Some monsters don't just sabotage, they stage their sabotage like a ritual. The woman placed a hand dramatically over her chest. I told the staff the carpet was slippery. They should take responsibility. Then she gestured to the wet fabric again. "But it's fine, it's only a dress. Only a dress." I have heard some cold lines in my career, but that one still ranks high. The bridesmaid closest to her flinched. I noticed. "Emily," Lauren whispered. "She said earlier that my dress wasn't elegant enough, that it didn't look like something a woman of their family would wear." I breathed in slowly. There it was, the motive. A combination of image, control, and the obsession with social appearance that poisons so many weddings long before the vows are spoken. This wasn't about aesthetic preference. This was about dominance. And at that moment, I remembered something subtle from the venue walkthrough the day before. While Lauren admired the waterfront view, her mother-in-law had examined the dress bag with too much curiosity, asking questions about alterations, fabric, delicacy, and stain resistance. At the time, I brushed it off as typical commentary. But now, it rang like an alarm. I stayed calm. I always stay calm. Brides need calm. But my mind was already assembling the timeline, replaying details, looking for contradictions, because a woman like this rarely acts without leaving clues. And if there was one thing I'd learned after years of untangling wedding disasters, it was this: the truth always lives in the gaps between what people say and what they want. When I asked the woman to step outside for a moment, she blinked at me with that icy confusion people use when they're pretending not to understand authority. "Why?" "I've already apologized." "Because," I said gently, "I need a moment alone with my bride." Her lips tightened, but she complied. Stiff posture, slow steps. A silent performance meant to remind us she believed she still held the upper hand. The door closed, and Lauren collapsed into the nearest chair, pressing her palms to her temples. "Emily," she looked at the dress before she fell. I saw her. She paused, angled the glass, and then her breath hitched. "I don't know how to prove it." That's when I felt the shift, that strange sensation wedding planners get when we sense a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered. A thread pulling us toward something bigger. I didn't know it yet, but someone else had seen everything. Someone who could turn this accident into evidence. And that was the moment I realized. This was no spill. This was the opening move of a woman who thought she had already won. In the hours leading up to the spill, I had already sensed something shifting between Lauren and her future mother-in-law, a quiet tug-of-war that most guests never notice, but wedding planners feel like pressure under the skin. It starts with subtle comments, small corrections, strategic questions about the wedding budget, the cost of the dress, the decision-making process. These remarks rarely sound hostile at first, but they carry an undertone of possession, as if the wedding is a shared property and the bride is just a temporary tenant. When I first met Lauren, she was excited, determined, and proud of the fact that she had paid for her own dress. She told me she didn't want to owe anything to anyone, especially not to the woman who treated generosity like a binding contract. I had nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Some mothers use money like silk thread, soft enough to look harmless, strong enough to tie someone's hands without leaving a mark. The tension became obvious during the fitting 2 weeks before the wedding. Lauren stepped out of the dressing room glowing, the way brides glow when they finally feel like themselves inside the gown they chose. But the monster-in-law's expression didn't soften, not even for a second. Instead, she tilted her head with that serene disdain wealthy women master, like a second language. "It's very modern," she said. "Almost too modern. And so bright. Do you think this shade of white photographs well under waterfront lighting? Some colors wash people out. Just a thought." I remember watching Lauren's smile falter, the kind of tiny falter a planner notices instantly. I also noticed the woman touching the fabric with controlled fingertips, almost testing it, as if evaluating its resilience. No one else caught that moment, but it made my instincts tighten. People who intend to protect a dress, touch it gently. People who intend to judge it, touch it differently, with calculation instead of admiration. Later, she added, "In our family, brides usually choose something more classic, something that represents tradition rather than trend." She said tradition, the way some people say mistake. I stepped in with professional neutrality. "The lighting at the venue is adjustable, and this fabric photographs beautifully. We've tested similar materials many times." The woman smiled. "But it was the kind that closes a door rather than opens one. If you say so, you're the expert." But she didn't mean it. Those comments didn't stop there. At the rehearsal walkthrough, she made 3 separate remarks about the price of the dress. Not the actual number. She didn't know the exact figure, but she referenced the cost of living differences in Charleston. The unexpected expenses young couples tend to overlook, and the financial pressure brides put on their families when they choose something extravagant. The irony, she had paid nothing for the gown, not a single dollar. Lauren had shouldered every cost herself precisely to avoid this dynamic. Yet the monster-in-law still used money as a source of authority, criticizing a financial decision she had no involvement in. At one point, while Lauren and Ethan were discussing ceremony placement, the woman turned to me and said, "Do you ever worry that brides get carried away? I mean, this dress is such an investment. Expectations rise with the cost, and not everyone can handle the responsibility of being the center of attention." I remember blinking, realizing she wasn't talking about the dress anymore. She was talking about Lauren minimizing her, tightening the rope in that subtle, polished way only someone deeply experienced in social warfare could do. "Lauren handles herself beautifully," I said. The woman's smile froze. "We'll see." It was in that moment I understood her motive wasn't just control, it was competition. She wasn't trying to guide her son's wedding, she was trying to outshine it. From there, the criticism escalated. She questioned the neckline, she questioned the bouquet, she questioned whether the silhouette was appropriate for the family's reputation. She suggested alternatives that looked nothing like what Lauren wanted, styles that echoed her own wedding photos. She had shown us earlier, unprompted, flipping through them like a model presenting a catalog. Every comment chipped away at Lauren's confidence, but the bride stayed polite, choosing silence over conflict. Ethan noticed, but he was stuck in that difficult middle space so many grooms find themselves in, wanting to defend his future wife, yet conditioned to avoid upsetting the woman who raised him. He tried to soothe both sides, which only deepened the imbalance. It reminded me of a couple I once worked with years earlier, where the groom spent so much time mediating his mother's emotions that he forgot to protect the bride's. That wedding imploded before the reception even started. I remember thinking how familiar this pattern felt, how dangerous it becomes when a mother uses her emotional history as leverage. On the morning of the rehearsal, Lauren pulled me aside. "Emily, I don't want drama," she said softly. "I don't want to believe she would ever ruin my day on purpose. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe it's just complicated. But the truth was already visible. When a bride begins rationalizing someone else's hostility, the sabotage has already begun, just not yet physically. Hours before the wine spill, I caught the woman alone in the hallway, staring at the dress bag again. She didn't touch it this time, but her expression was sharp, analytical. She asked, "Are you certain this fabric is safe from sudden mishaps, spills, accidents? Waterfront humidity can be unpredictable. Coming from her, the word felt like a warning. No fabric is invincible, I replied carefully. But Lauren takes excellent care of her gown. She hummed, as though processing that answer more deeply than necessary. And then came the moment that replayed in my mind later, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. She casually requested a glass of wine from the catering team far earlier than anyone else. Not champagne, red wine. A bold Merlot, thick, staining, the kind you never see near a wedding dress, unless someone is either reckless or strategic. When she lifted the glass, she didn't drink. She swirled it, watching the color cling to the rim, measuring it, testing its weight. At the time, I told myself I was being overly suspicious. I didn't want to believe she was the kind of woman who would weaponize a drink. But after years in this world, you learn that sabotage is rarely loud. It begins quietly, with a swirl, a glance, a question disguised as concern. Looking back, it was clear the dress wasn't ruined in a single moment. It was ruined in stages, in criticisms, in calculated comments, in psychological pressure designed to make Lauren feel small enough that destroying the gown would seem like an accident rather than an attack. And as I stood in that bridal suite now, watching Lauren try to wipe away stains that would never come out, I realized we weren't dealing with a clumsy mistake. We were dealing with a woman who had been preparing this moment long before the wine ever touched the silk. The rehearsal should have been the calm before the celebration. It's usually the moment when families relax a little, when nerves soften, and the couple finally begins to see their wedding taking shape. But that afternoon in Charleston, the tension followed us like a shadow. I could feel it trailing behind Lauren as she practiced walking down the aisle, the way her shoulders curled inward every time her future mother-in-law stepped into the room. The woman arrived late, of course, not late enough to be disrespectful, but late enough to make an entrance. Her heels clicked against the historic estate's stone floors, echoing in the courtyard like a declaration of ownership. She carried herself the way people carry expensive antiques, carefully, proudly, as though the environment existed to spotlight her. She brought another glass of red wine with her, a decision that made every vendor immediately straighten their posture. Red wine near wedding fabrics is like fire near silk. Even amateurs know to keep distance. But she cradled the glass with practiced ease, swirling it absent-mindedly as though she were testing gravity. When she reached Lauren, she offered a smile so polished it almost reflected. "Sweetheart, a toast before rehearsal. Just a small one." Lauren blinked. "Now we're about to start." "Exactly," the monster-in-law replied. "It's symbolic. A blessing for the day." I stepped in gently. "We have a tight schedule. Perhaps we could save that for afterward." She didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she lifted her glass higher, as if claiming the moment. "Ethan, come join us. We should celebrate your bride." The groom hesitated, glancing at Lauren with that silent question couples exchange when unsure of how to navigate a parent. He didn't want to upset anyone, not his fiancée, and certainly not the woman whose approval had steered his entire childhood. Lauren gave a small nod, a tired one. They stood together, and the woman raised her glass. "To tradition," she said. "To elegance, to a wedding that reflects the standards of our family." That last line made my stomach twist. It was a toast, disguised as a warning. Lauren didn't lift her drink. I don't think she could. And then the moment happened, the one she would later call an accident, with such dramatic fragility it made the staff exchange looks. She took one step backward, exaggerated just enough to be noticeable, and said loudly, "Oh." The carpet her heel didn't catch. Her body didn't stumble. But her wrist tilted with perfect precision, sending the wine arcing forward in a controlled cascade. It landed directly onto the section of the dress that would be most visible during the ceremony. Bright red, thick, irreversible. The gasp Lauren let out didn't sound human. It was the sound a person makes when months of planning, sacrifice, and hope collapse in an instant. The vendors froze. The bridesmaids pushed in instinctively. Ethan's face went paper white. But the woman? She placed a hand over her mouth, like an actress in a daytime drama. "Oh no, oh sweetheart, I'm so clumsy. These old carpets are dangerous. Someone really should have them replaced." She didn't even look at the floor. She looked at me, and her eyes were steady. Almost too steady. In weddings, accidents are chaotic. They come with panic, flailing, messy reactions. But her performance was too controlled, like she'd rehearsed the lines. That was the moment I felt a cold certainty settle into my bones. She had done it intentionally, and she believed she'd get away with it. When Lauren ran out of the room, I followed, leaving the vendors to redirect the rehearsal. I found her in the hallway staring at her reflection in a glass cabinet, her hands shaking around the stained fabric. "Emily," she whispered, "she didn't fall. She didn't even lose her balance. She aimed." I placed a steady hand on her back. "Tell me everything." Slowly. But before she could continue, one of the servers approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said to me, "I know I shouldn't say anything, but I saw her look down at the dress right before she spilled." She wasn't looking at the carpet. She was looking at where the wine would land. Lauren's breath caught. Mine did too. This was no longer a suspicion. Now it was a pattern, a coordinated act with multiple witnesses, all seeing different angles of the same truth. When we returned to the rehearsal area, the woman was already shifting blame, aiming it at the staff. "These floors are uneven. Someone could get seriously injured," she said, gesturing dramatically to the stone tiles that had survived 3 centuries without causing a single wine-related disaster. The catering manager approached me quietly. "Emily." She kept asking earlier whether red wine stains permanently, like she wanted confirmation. "Did she touch the bottles?" I asked. He nodded. Twice, a chill went through me. In my profession, you learn to recognize setups. They start small, an innocent question, a request framed as curiosity, a complaint disguised as concern. But once the pieces come together, you can see the blueprint clearly, the way motive, opportunity, and timing align like a puzzle meant to collapse at the perfect moment. And in this case, the blueprint pointed to humiliation, not clumsiness. After the spill, Lauren excused herself to the suite, her bridesmaids following to help salvage whatever could be saved. I stayed behind to observe the woman more closely. She acted unaffected, sipping the remaining wine as though nothing catastrophic had occurred. Ethan eventually confronted her in a low voice. "Mom, you didn't have to bring wine right now," she shrugged. "I was simply celebrating. It's not my fault these things happen." He pressed a hand to his forehead. "She worked so hard for that dress. Then she should have chosen a fabric that wasn't so fragile," she replied coolly. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. She wasn't concerned, not even inconvenienced. If anything, she seemed relieved, as though the dress had been an obstacle she finally removed. But the most telling moment came when she caught me observing her. She raised her glass slightly, almost like a toast, and offered a tight smile that carried no warmth. It was the kind of smile that says, "You cannot touch me, you cannot prove anything, you cannot challenge my narrative." Only people who feel untouchable smile like that, but she had miscalculated. Because weddings, unlike the social arenas she dominated, have witnesses, cameras, vendors, staff, people who see everything because their job depends on paying attention. And one of those people, someone who had been capturing the rehearsal from a distance, had documented the moment from an angle no one expected. But I wouldn't learn that until later. For now, all I knew was the story she was telling didn't align with the stains, the timing, or the gazes exchanged across the courtyard. And when truth begins to fracture like that, it always finds a way to surface, even if someone tries to bury it under a perfectly rehearsed performance. When I finally slipped away from the courtyard and into the quieter hallway near the bridal suite, the air felt heavier, the kind of heaviness that appears right before truth forces its way through cracks people try desperately to seal. Lauren was inside with her bridesmaids, blotting the ruined gown with trembling hands. The smell of red wine still clung to the fabric, sharp and sour, as if marking the sabotage with its own signature. I didn't enter immediately. I stood in the doorway, listening to their whispers, soft, frantic, heartbroken. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a moment like this, a silence that isn't empty, but full of shock, trying to rearrange itself into understanding. When they finally noticed me, the room shifted. The bridesmaids stepped back, making space for me beside the dress. Lauren held a cloth in one hand, soaked in diluted stain remover. It wouldn't help. Not on silk, not with red wine. Not at this depth. "Emily," she said, her voice fragile but raw with anger. "How am I supposed to walk down the aisle tomorrow like this?" I knelt beside her, inspecting the damage again, not emotionally this time, but analytically. The stain patterns were unmistakable. Wine had landed in a single concentrated splash, not scattered across the skirt, as it would have if she'd truly stumbled. It was a direct pour, not a fall. But I knew evidence needed more than instinct. It needed corroboration. I told her gently. "Someone saw something. I just don't know who yet, but we'll find out." Behind me, one of the bridesmaids cleared her throat. "There was a photographer here earlier for rehearsal footage. Maybe he caught something." My mind sparked. Rehearsal documentation, a practice some couples choose for albums or social media teasers, meant multiple angles, continuous recording, and, most importantly, no bias. Cameras don't protect reputations. They capture reality. I thanked her, told Lauren to breathe, and stepped out of the suite with a purpose I hadn't felt since the morning. The photographer, Casey, was packing up near the garden. When I approached, his assistant nudged him subtly, as if already aware something had gone wrong. "Casey," I began, keeping my tone even, "did your team record the toast?" He blinked. "The toast? Yeah. We got everything from the groom's arrival to the group walkthrough. Did you get the spill?" He nodded slowly. From 3 different angles, I exhaled, not with relief, but with confirmation. He hesitated before asking, "Are we supposed to send it to you first?" "Yes," I said, "before anyone else." Immediately, we stepped aside, and he opened his laptop. His assistant pulled up a clip, time-stamped for the start of the rehearsal. As the footage began, I braced myself. I had seen thousands of incriminating moments in my career, confrontations, breakdowns, manipulations, but dress sabotage hits differently. It's intimate, it's symbolic, it's meant to wound in a place that should feel safest. In the video, the woman stood near Lauren, with the glass raised, looking regal, composed, rehearsed, not clumsy, not distracted, not rushed. At the exact second she tripped, her eyes flicked down to the dress, not the floor. Her wrist tilted just before her foot moved. It was intentional, unmistakably intentional. The spill trajectory matched the angle of her hand, not her body. And when she finished the motion, her facial expression didn't register shock, it registered satisfaction. Even worse, the assistant zoomed in on another camera angle that showed her glancing toward the lens immediately afterward, as if checking whether her performance had been captured convincingly enough. But she hadn't accounted for high-resolution zoom, or my ability to read micro-expressions the way some people read novels. When the clip stopped, Casey looked at me, brows raised. "That wasn't an accident." "No," I replied softly. "It wasn't." A fresh wave of anger rolled through me, not the kind that burns hot, but the cold kind that comes from recognizing cruelty wrapped in sophistication. The monster-in-law knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the emotional cost, the financial cost, the humiliation. And she had planned the timing to maximize the impact. I thanked the team, collected the footage, and made my way back toward the main house, rehearsing what I would say next. Confronting a powerful woman like her requires precision. You cannot accuse without evidence. You cannot react without control. Mothers who operate through social dominance expect to remain untouchable. If you challenge them too early, they twist the narrative until you question your own memory. But this time, there was no room for interpretation. Before bringing the evidence to Lauren or Ethan, I needed to understand the mother's motive more deeply. I replayed her behavior in my mind, her criticisms, her fixation on the gown, her commentary about tradition, her subtle jabs about cost. She wasn't simply controlling, she was threatened by a dress she didn't choose, threatened by a bride she didn't select, threatened by a wedding she couldn't shape into her reflection. And women like her don't just want influence, they want dominance. They want every detail to whisper their name, even if that name is never spoken aloud. While heading toward the courtyard, I overheard two staff members talking quietly behind a column. 100% deliberate, one whispered, "I saw her shift her weight. People don't fall like that." The other replied, "She looked right at that dress, like she was aiming." When they noticed me, they fell silent, but their expressions confirmed everything. By the time I reached the groom's suite, my own pulse had settled into a steady, deliberate rhythm. Ethan opened the door looking exhausted, torn between confusion and loyalty. "Emily, is Lauren okay?" "No," I said honestly, "and I think you know why." He closed his eyes. For a moment, I saw a boy who had spent years managing a parent's emotions, trying to keep peace in a home where peace was conditional. "I don't want to believe she did it on purpose," he said. "I know," I answered. "But you need to see something." I set the laptop on the table and pressed play. Ethan leaned forward, his jaw tightening with each second. When the spill replayed in slow motion, something inside him hardened. He inhaled sharply, then stepped back as though the screen itself had struck him. "She looked at the dress," he whispered. "She looked before she moved." He pressed a hand to his forehead. "Why would she do this? Why now?" "Because some women would rather destroy what they can't control than watch it flourish without them." I didn't say that aloud. He was already grieving the truth. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you need to set a boundary. Today, not tomorrow. Not after the ceremony." He swallowed. "I know." And then, without hesitation, he picked up the laptop and walked out of the room straight toward the woman who had spent years convincing him she was incapable of wrongdoing. I followed, because this confrontation wasn't just necessary, it was overdue. Ethan didn't say a word as we walked toward the main hall. He held the laptop the way someone holds a truth they're not ready to confront, but can no longer run from. His jaw was tight, his steps controlled. But there was something new in his posture, a line in the sand forming with every breath. We found her exactly where I expected, standing beneath the tall arched window, bathed in warm evening light, as if she had curated even the lighting for her own benefit. Some people move through a space as guests. She moved through it like a curator. Every gesture, every glance, every pause seemed designed to remind the room who she believed the centerpiece truly was. But even someone that polished can't hide from evidence. She noticed us before we spoke, her smile soft and painfully composed. "Ethan, darling, is everything all right? Your bride seems quite fragile today. Perhaps she's overwhelmed." Her tone carried a velvety concern, the kind that disguises territorial dominance as maternal wisdom. I had heard it 100 times at different weddings, the voice of a woman who believes the bride's emotions are inconveniences, not realities. Ethan didn't respond. He set the laptop on the antique table, opened it, and turned the screen toward her. "We need to watch something," he said. The monster-in-law's expression barely twitched. But I saw the microscopic shift, the tightening around her eyes, the slight lift of her chin, the instinctive preparation for defense before even knowing what she was defending against. He pressed play. The footage began innocently enough. Lauren standing with the bouquet, Ethan smiling beside her, and the woman approaching with that infamous glass of red wine. But then the moment of impact unfolded with clinical clarity. Her eyes dropped to the dress, not the carpet. Her wrist angled before her foot moved. The wine poured in a steady, deliberate stream. And then, the final nail, her glance directly at the camera. This wasn't clumsiness, this was orchestration. She watched the video without blinking, her face a mask so still it almost looked carved. When the clip ended, she inhaled, collecting herself like a queen, preparing a speech. "That," she said calmly, "is not what happened." Ethan stared at her. "Mom, the video shows everything. You're misinterpreting it." Her voice didn't crack, it sharpened. "I stumbled. The camera angle makes it look worse. Anyone could see it differently." Her denial wasn't surprising. Women like her never confess. They reframe, rewrite, rebuild the narrative until they stand atop it again, even if it means twisting reality until everyone else feels dizzy. "Why did you look at the dress before you moved?" Ethan asked softly. "Why were you aiming?" She straightened her posture. "I was admiring the fabric. I wanted the best for your wedding. That dress wasn't appropriate for our family. I was trying to help her make better choices." There it was, the motive, unfiltered this time, not elegance, not tradition, power, ownership, the belief that the bride should reflect her standards, not her own identity. Ethan shook his head. "You didn't help her, you humiliated her." She humiliated herself, the woman snapped, losing her polished composure for the first time. Wearing something that expensive without thinking of the consequences. Weddings cost money, Ethan, real money, and she wants the attention of a gown that doesn't suit her. I watched Ethan closely. Sometimes, it's not the sabotage that breaks a groom's trust, it's hearing the intentions spoken aloud for the first time. He stepped between her and the screen. "You don't get to criticize her for buying her own dress. You didn't pay for it. You didn't contribute a cent. You don't get to destroy something just because you didn't control it." She stiffened. "I am your mother. I have a say, not here," he said. "Not anymore." The silence that followed felt electric, charged with years of unspoken resentment, suddenly pushed into daylight. She tried one last tactic, the one I had been expecting. Her voice softened, trembling faintly. "Ethan, sweetheart, how can you choose her over me? Everything I've done for this family." But he didn't fold. He didn't comfort. He didn't apologize. He finally saw her. "I'm not choosing," he said. "There is no choice. You crossed a line. You hurt her. You hurt us. And you don't get to pretend you didn't." The monster-in-law's eyes hardened, all emotional performance evaporating. "So that's it? You're banning me because your fiancé is too sensitive to handle a little spill?" "I'm banning you," Ethan replied, "because you meant to spill it." Her lips pressed into a thin line, the kind of line that forms when a person realizes their strategy has failed, but their pride refuses to retreat gracefully. "You're not coming to the bridal suite," he continued. "You're not giving more opinions. You're not touching anything else. You're not attending venue walkthroughs, fittings, preparations, nothing." The woman blinked, taken aback by how calmly he listed every restriction. Boundaries, when spoken by someone who has never used them before, hit with a force that others don't expect. "And if you can't respect that," he added, "you won't attend the ceremony either." That was the moment the facade cracked entirely. Her breath hitched, just slightly, enough to reveal the sting, enough to expose the truth beneath all the elegance, all the social poise, all the sharpened manipulation. She stepped back, a controlled retreat, but a retreat nonetheless. Lauren appeared then, standing just outside the doorway. Her eyes were red, but her expression was steady. She wasn't waiting to attack, she wasn't looking for revenge. She just needed to know one thing. Was she safe? Ethan held out his hand. "You don't have to deal with her anymore. Not today, not tomorrow. Lauren walked to him, slow but certain. And when she reached his side, he wrapped an arm around her protectively, not performative, not forced, but as someone who had finally chosen the right fight. The woman opened her mouth, perhaps to object, perhaps to plead, but no sound came. She looked at them together, united, and for the first time all day, she wasn't the center of the narrative. She was the consequence. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. Her heels echoed through the long hallway like a retreating army. And for the first time since the spill, the atmosphere in the house felt breathable again. Later that evening, when I delivered the dress to the emergency restoration team, the lead seamstress examined the stain and said quietly, "This wasn't clumsy, this was intentional." I nodded. "We know." The next day, when Lauren walked down the aisle in her partially restored gown, altered, but still radiant, the symbolism was stronger than any perfection she might have imagined. Because she didn't just walk toward Ethan, she walked away from the woman who tried to break her. And as I watched them say their vows, I felt something settle inside me. A reminder I've learned repeatedly through years in this industry: some dresses survive more than stains. Some brides survive more than sabotage. And sometimes, the truth doesn't just restore peace, it restores power. But nothing could have prepared me for the next wedding, where the destruction wasn't subtle, accidental looking, or disguised behind a wine glass. The next monster-in-law didn't spill a drink. She picked up scissors. Long after the guests had left the rehearsal dinner and the vendors finished packing their equipment, I found myself standing alone on the balcony of the waterfront estate, watching the moon ripple across the dark water. Weddings always breathe differently at night. The chaos settles, the emotions stretch, and the truth lingers like mist. You can almost feel the energy of the day rearranging itself, deciding what pieces of the story will matter tomorrow and which ones will fade. But nothing about what happened with Lauren was going to fade. Even after the dress was restored, even after the ceremony proceeded with beauty and calm, even after the monster-in-law retreated into quiet embarrassment, the weight of what she'd done hung in the air like an aftershock. Sabotage leaves fingerprints, not just on fabric, but on relationships, on expectations, on the emotional cost of the wedding budget. It shifts the dynamic forever. As I watched Lauren smile at Ethan during the reception, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because she had reclaimed her day. Sadness because I knew this wouldn't be the last time I'd witness a mother crossing the line between love and ownership. Some families think weddings are competitions. Some mothers think brides are threats, and some monsters believe the spotlight belongs to them, no matter who bleeds for it. Later that night, as I gathered my things to leave the venue, one of the staff members approached me. "You handled that well," she said softly. "Most planners would have ignored the signs. But you saw her." "Yes. I saw her, I always do, because these patterns repeat. Different women, different motives, same hunger for control." I drove back to my hotel through quiet Charleston streets, passing the glowing windows of historic homes, each one holding its own secrets. And I remember thinking something I've thought many times before. If a mother is willing to destroy a dress, she's willing to destroy much more. Little did I know that the next wedding waiting on my calendar would make this one look almost subtle. The story arrived 3 weeks later, wrapped not in elegance or pretense, but in panic. A voicemail from a bride named Maya, her voice shaking in a way I recognized immediately, the tremor of someone who's trying not to believe what they've just witnessed. "Emily, you need to call me back. Something happened with my dress. Something terrible. And I think she did it on purpose." Another dress. Another woman. Another calculated act. I returned the call within minutes, and as soon as she answered, I heard the unraveling behind every breath. "She said she was fixing it," Maya whispered. But when I walked into the seamstress room, it was in pieces. Actual pieces. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar burn rise in my chest. Because if a monster-in-law destroying a dress is horrifying, doing it with scissors in secret elevates the sabotage into something almost ritualistic. I flew to Scottsdale the next morning. The desert sky looked deceptively peaceful, that soft gradient of rose and gold you see in postcards, but the moment I entered the luxury resort where Maya and Daniel were preparing for their wedding, I felt a different atmosphere entirely. Hotels can hide noise, hide footsteps, hide guests wandering the hallways at night. But they can't hide tension. Tension hums? When I stepped into the seamstress room, the sight stopped me cold. The dress wasn't stained. It wasn't torn by accident. It was disassembled, shredded with intention, with precision, with a level of audacity that made the previous sabotage feel almost childish. Fabric strips lay across the floor like confetti after a parade, except there was nothing celebratory about it. The bodice was sliced diagonally. The train had been divided into long, narrow ribbons. The lace, the expensive lace Maya had chosen after saving for months, had been cut so meticulously that it looked like someone had followed a pattern only they understood. Maya was standing in the corner, arms wrapped around her body, as if trying to hold herself together now that her dress couldn't be. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, locked somewhere between disbelief and devastation. She said it violated tradition, Maya murmured when she finally looked at me. She said she was preserving the family's values, and when I asked why she was touching it at all, she said she was helping. The word helping can be the most dangerous lie a manipulative mother ever tells. Where is she now? I asked. Maya swallowed, probably telling everyone the same story. That she was tailoring it for me, that I misunderstood, that I'm overreacting. Of course she was. Monsters rely on confusion as a shield. If they can blur the narrative before anyone questions it, they regain control. The resort staff hovered at the doorway, wide-eyed and unsettled. One woman from housekeeping stepped forward cautiously and whispered she locked herself in this room for almost 40 minutes. When we heard the scissors, we thought she was doing a hem. We had no idea. Her voice trailed off. I looked at the remains of the dress again, the financial loss, the emotional destruction, the hours and hours of labor undone by a single act of entitlement. But more than that, I saw the intention. This wasn't sabotage disguised as an accident. This wasn't humiliation masked behind clumsiness. This was punishment, a declaration of dominance. A reminder of who she believed held authority over the bride, over the family, over the wedding budget she partially funded. The kind of mother who doesn't just want control of the wedding, she wants control of the bride. And as Maya continued to tremble beside the ruins of her gown, something inside me settled into the same quiet determination I felt when I handled Lauren's disaster. Different woman, different motive, same darkness. But before I could piece together the real reason behind this destruction, before I could understand why she had taken scissors to a dress she didn't, Ona's cousin approached me with a confession that changed everything. "Emily," she whispered, glancing around nervously, "she planned this. Weeks ago, she told me Daniel would thank her for it." And just like that, the pattern revealed its next layer. This wasn't about modesty. This wasn't about tradition. This wasn't even about the dress. This was about power. And she was just getting started. When I met Maya in person for the first time, I understood immediately why her dress had become a target. She had that quiet softness certain brides carry, the kind that makes them easy to love, but tragically easy to intimidate. She wasn't someone who challenged others, especially not someone older, louder, or financially influential. And that dynamic is dangerous when a monster-in-law sees opportunity in it. Daniel greeted me politely, but there was exhaustion behind his smile. I've worked with dozens of grooms like him, men who have spent their lives walking a narrow balance beam between pleasing their mothers and protecting their partners. Some manage it well. Some fall, most wobble, but Daniel was performing emotional gymnastics. The resort suite where they were staying looked immaculate, fresh flowers, luxury linens, polished floors, but beneath the surface decor, the atmosphere vibrated with tension. It felt like walking into a room where someone had just slammed a door, even though every door was still open. I started by asking Maya to walk me through the days leading up to this. It started with her asking about the cost, she said quietly. Not offering to help. Not asking out of curiosity. More like she wanted to know whether I had chosen something that exceeded what she considered acceptable. Financial leverage. Classic pattern. A mother who contributes to the wedding budget often believes it gives her ownership over every aesthetic choice. And even when she doesn't actually pay, she uses the idea of money as a psychological weapon, a subtle reminder of status. What did she say exactly? I asked. Maya hesitated, then repeated it in a soft voice. Our family prefers modest dresses, respectful dresses, something dignified, not something that screams for attention. I felt my jaw tighten. There it was, the coded language. Words like modest, respectful, family, dignified, they aren't about clothing, they're about obedience. And how did Daniel respond? I asked, glancing toward him. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I tried to keep the peace. I thought if we just ignored it, she'd stop. She didn't stop. Women like her never stop, not when they believe the bride represents a defiance they must correct. Later that afternoon, I walked the couple through the resort grounds, taking notes on ceremony flow and vendor placement. But even as we discussed seating arrangements and lighting, Maya kept glancing at the seamstress wing with a kind of dread that tightened her shoulders. She was obsessed with tradition, Maya murmured as we passed a marble staircase. She kept talking about how every woman in their family wore gowns with long sleeves, closed necklines, and no train. And when I said that wasn't my style, she just stared at me like I had insulted her heritage. She didn't just stare, Daniel added quietly. She said Maya was trying to erase our roots. I stopped walking. Erase our roots. That phrase told me everything I needed to know. For some monsters, weddings aren't celebrations. They're inheritance ceremonies, rites, in which the bride is expected to fold herself into the family's identity, not stand beside it. When she doesn't, they react as if the bride has committed a crime. And when she asked about your fitting schedule, I asked Maya. She said she wanted to come with me to make sure the tailor didn't misrepresent the family image. Maya's voice trembled with humiliation. I didn't want her there, I told her politely. She said declining her presence was ungrateful. Ungrateful, another coded word. It's the emotional leash controlling mothers use when they want obedience without stating it outright. The day before the destruction, the tension hit a new level. She told me she had an idea, Maya said. Something that would fix the dress. And that she had spoken to a tailor about adjusting it. My eyes narrowed. Did you authorize any alterations? Of course not, Maya said. But she insisted. She said her family's brides always wore dresses that honored history. That modern designs were vulgar. Daniel looked away, ashamed. I didn't think she would actually do anything. I thought she was just posturing. Posturing, another familiarity. Manipulative mothers test boundaries before crossing them. If no one stops them early, they escalate. The day the dress was destroyed began deceptively normal. Maya had gone to the spa for a massage scheduled by her bridesmaids. Daniel was handling guest arrivals, and the monster-in-law supposedly had a meeting with resort staff about seating arrangements. Except she didn't go to the meeting. She went to the seamstress room. She said she needed to check the stitching, Maya whispered, eyes glassy. She told the staff she was acting on my behalf. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene, a woman walking into a room she had no authority to enter, closing the door, locking it, and lifting the scissors with a calm, calculated certainty. Not in a moment of rage, but in a moment of power, a moment where she felt entitled to rewrite her son's wedding into something she could tolerate. When I asked the resort staff what they saw, they described it in haunting clarity. She closed the door and said she needed privacy, one staffer told me. She moved slowly, like she had a plan, said another. We heard snipping, rhythmic, steady, whispered a third. Snipping, rhythmic, steady. That wasn't panic, that was purpose. After gathering their accounts, I walked back toward the remains of the gown, studying the cuts more closely. This wasn't the chaotic shredding of someone having an emotional breakdown. These incisions were clean, deliberate, patterned. She had targeted high-value areas of the dress, the lacework, the bodice structure, the train. She knew exactly where to cut to render repairs nearly impossible. This wasn't about modesty. This wasn't about tradition. This wasn't about the wedding. It was about control, absolute, final, irreversible control. As I pieced these clues together, someone lingered behind me. When I turned, it was a young woman, late 20s, nervous, chewing her lip. I'm her niece, she whispered. And you need to know the truth. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Go on. She told me weeks ago she didn't approve of the dress. She said Maya didn't understand what it meant to marry into their family. She said if Maya wouldn't pick a dress that fit the family's standards, she would fix the problem herself. My chest tightened. She planned it, the niece continued. She actually planned the whole thing. She said. Daniel would thank her later for preventing him from marrying a woman who prioritizes appearance over tradition. Maya covered her mouth to keep from crying out, and in that quiet, painful moment, everything clicked into place. The criticism, the fixation on tradition, the financial pressure, the unsolicited opinions, the secrecy, the scissors. She had been building toward this step by step, cut by cut, until the dress and Maya's confidence lay in pieces. Now all that remained was the question that always comes next in stories like this. What happens when the truth finally reaches the person who has been enabling the monster without realizing it? Daniel. And he was about to hear everything. Daniel didn't speak for a long time after hearing his cousin's confession. He stood there in the corridor, eyes fixed on the floor, shoulders tight, like a man suddenly realizing the ground he'd grown up standing on had never been solid. I've seen that look before. The look of someone who has spent years rewriting reality to protect loyalty, only to discover that loyalty was being weaponized against him. Maya reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently, not out of rejection, but because he needed space to breathe, to feel, to process. I could almost hear the machinery of his mind grinding, trying to reconcile the mother he believed in with the woman who had cut a wedding dress into ribbons. She planned it, he whispered finally, almost to himself. She actually planned it. His cousin nodded slowly. She told me not to repeat it. She said it was family business. But after seeing Maya like that, I couldn't keep it to myself. Maya closed her eyes, and for a moment, everything inside her seemed to collapse inward. Not dramatically, but quietly, the way dignity collapses when someone finally stops trying to be strong. She hates me, Maya said, her voice breaking. I've tried to be respectful, I've tried to stay calm, I've tried to keep peace, but she hates me. No, Daniel said immediately, but his voice faltered. No, she doesn't hate you, she's... But there was no word he could choose that didn't taste like denial. I stepped forward, quietly, gently. Daniel, this isn't about hate. It's about control. She didn't cut the dress because of tradition. She cut it because Maya didn't bend. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening around a truth he had avoided for years. I knew she could be difficult. I knew she had strong opinions. But this is different. It's not different, I said. It's just more visible. His head shot up, eyes sharp with painful clarity, because he knew I was right. Some patterns don't suddenly appear. They simply escalate until they can no longer be ignored. He took a step back, leaned against the wall, and dragged a hand down his face. I thought keeping her calm would fix things. I thought if I kept the peace, she'd eventually accept Maya. She never wanted to accept me, Maya murmured. She wanted to remake me. The words lingered in the air like smoke. Then suddenly, Daniel stood up straighter. Something shifted in him, a cracking, then a realignment. A son becoming a man who finally sees the damage being done, not just to his wedding, but to the woman he loved. His grief transformed into resolve. "Where is she now?" he asked. His cousin hesitated. "She's in the lounge, telling some relatives that the dressmaker ruined the gown." Of course she was. Monsters rewrite stories before anyone else has a chance to speak. Daniel exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between anger and awakening. "I'm talking to her now." He started walking, and Maya instinctively reached for him again. This time, he took her hand, squeezing it once firmly. "You're coming with me," he said. She blinked. "I don't want to fight." "It won't be a fight," he said. "It'll be the truth." As they walked together, I followed a few steps behind, not intervening, not guiding, just observing. Because what was about to happen wasn't logistical. It wasn't a vendor issue. It wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was the core fracture of a family coming to light. And in weddings, family fractures always shape the emotional cost more deeply than money ever could. We found her in the resort lounge, sitting elegantly on a velvet chair, surrounded by 2 aunts and an older uncle. She held a cup of tea like she was starring in a portrait, poised, self-contained, immune. The butterfly effect of her destruction had not reached her expression at all. Mothers like her aren't moved by consequences. They're moved by losing control. When she saw Daniel and Maya approaching, she smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. "There you are," she said warmly. "I was just explaining to your relatives how unfortunate the seamstress mistake was. Terrible craftsmanship these days, no pride in their work." Daniel stared at her for a long, heavy second. "Mom," he said quietly, "you need to stop." She blinked slowly, still performing grace. "Stop what, dear? Stop lying." The smile froze. The room shifted, relatives straightened in their seats. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone cooling by degrees. Daniel stepped closer, holding Maya's hand tightly. "We know the truth. We know you destroyed the dress, and we know you planned it." Her eyes hardened, not wide with shock, not stuttering with panic, hardened like a steel gate dropping into place. "That's absurd," she said. "I tried to help her. Her dress was inappropriate. Someone had to intervene." "With scissors?" Daniel snapped. Her jaw tightened. "If she refuses tradition, she refuses the family. I was preserving our values by shredding her dress." She stood abruptly, her poise cracking like porcelain under pressure. "Daniel, think about what you're saying. You're accusing your own mother of sabotage on the eve of your wedding. Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" "It's not ridiculous," he said. "It's reality." The uncle beside her cleared his throat. "Is this true?" he asked cautiously. She shot him a look sharp enough to cut fabric. "They're exaggerating. They're overly dramatic. She's unstable. You know how brides get before a wedding." I stepped forward then, not to argue, but to anchor the truth. "The staff heard you cutting. The door was locked. The dress was destroyed in a pattern, too clean to be accidental. And your niece confirmed your intentions." Her head snapped toward her niece, who stood anxiously near the door. "You betrayed the family," she hissed. "No," the niece whispered, voice trembling. "You betrayed Maya." For the first time, genuine fury, unmasked, unfiltered, flashed across her face. It was startling in its intensity. Not the fury of someone wrongly accused, but the fury of someone whose plan had finally slipped beyond their control. "You should be thanking me," she snapped at Daniel. "I saved you from a bride who doesn't respect where you come from." "You didn't save me," Daniel said. "You humiliated the woman I love, the woman you love," she repeated, mocking the phrase, "You're blinded. She's beneath our standards and you know it." Maya flinched. Daniel stepped in front of her instinctively. That was the moment. The crack. The shift. The crossing of a line she couldn't uncross. Daniel's voice dropped to a tone I'd never heard from him. Steady. Final. Grounded. "You're done." You're not part of the preparations anymore. You're not going near Maya. You're not touching another item for this wedding. And if you can't accept that, you're not coming to the ceremony." The room went silent. The monster-in-law's mouth trembled, not with sadness, but with outrage so intense it left her breathless. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "I would," he said. "And I am." And in that moment, her power collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. She sank slowly back into the velvet chair, her hands trembling, her eyes burning with a rage she could no longer direct outward. For the first time, she wasn't the puppeteer, she wasn't the judge, she wasn't the guardian of family image, she was the cause of the damage. And everyone in that room saw it. Maya squeezed Daniel's hand, tears filling her eyes, not from pain, but from relief. Because this wasn't just the exposure of a lie, it was the beginning of a boundary that should have existed years before scissors ever touched fabric. And yet, something inside me knew the story wasn't finished. Not until the couple rebuilt what she tried so hard to destroy. The confrontation in the lounge should have ended the disaster, but weddings have a way of demanding closure that goes beyond private truth. And in this case, the damage wasn't just emotional, it was material, visible, irreversible. A wedding dress isn't just clothing, it's an investment of time, money, memory, and identity. When a monster-in-law destroys it, she doesn't just damage fabric, she shatters something symbolic in the bride. And the ruins of Maya's dress were still scattered across the seamstress room like the aftermath of a storm. The following morning, I returned to the room before sunrise. The resort was still half asleep, the halls silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning. The soft light creeping through the blinds cast long shadows over the shredded pieces of lace and satin. It looked like a battlefield, one where the only casualty was trust. I took photographs for documentation, not for legal reasons, for emotional ones. Brides often need proof, later, that they didn't imagine the cruelty. Proof that what happened wasn't overreaction or miscommunication. Proof that they survived something real. When Maya walked in, she froze. Her hands went to her mouth and tears welled in her eyes. Not with the shock of yesterday, but with the grief that surfaces after a night of trying to convince yourself you're okay. "Emily," she whispered, stepping near the table, "I don't even know where to begin. This doesn't feel recoverable." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "It will be, not because she'll fix it, but because we will." Her gaze softened with gratitude, but the fear didn't entirely leave her. The cost of the wedding had already stretched their budget to its limit. The dress had been one of her biggest expenses, a piece she'd saved for sacrificing vacations, clothes, dinners out. She had chosen this gown carefully, lovingly. Destroying it wasn't just inconvenient, it was cruel. Daniel entered the room a moment later. His expression had changed completely. He didn't look conflicted or overwhelmed anymore, he looked resolved. This was a man who had finally stopped absorbing damage for the sake of family peace and started fighting for the person he chose to build a life with. "I've already spoken to the resort," he said, "and to a seamstress in town. They can try to rebuild, but it'll cost almost as much as the dress itself." He exhaled shakily, and I told them, "Send the bill to my mother." Maya's eyes widened. "Daniel," she exploded. "She already did," he replied. Just in a different direction, he stepped closer to Maya, lifting her chin gently. "You're the most important person in my life, and I won't let her ruin this." I watched them quietly, feeling that familiar swell of relief, the moment a groom finally shifts from passive mediator to active protector. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, it changes everything. A few hours later, the extended family gathered inside one of the resort's lounges for brunch. The atmosphere was strange, heavy with curiosity, whispers floating from table to table. The monster-in-law sat alone at a corner table, her posture rigid, her expression carefully composed. She didn't look ashamed, she looked angry. That was her first mistake. Anger exposes guilt far more clearly than tears ever could. Daniel walked into the room holding Maya's hand. As they approached, the conversations quieted, curiosity turning into something sharper, anticipation. The woman didn't stand. She didn't greet them. She offered a tense smile and said, "I hope you've come to your senses and realized that blaming me was stop." Daniel interrupted. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to silence the entire room. He placed a folder on the table, the repair estimates, the photographs of the shredded gown, and a written statement from the staff confirming she had locked herself inside the seamstress room. When she saw it, a flicker of panic crossed her face, but she hid it quickly behind indignation. "This is unnecessary," she said. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No," Daniel replied. "I'm making something clear." He leaned forward slightly, but his voice stayed steady. "You destroyed something that wasn't yours. You humiliated Maya. You lied to everyone here about it. And you tried to make her feel unworthy of marrying into this family." The woman's lips tightened. "I did what needed to be done." Maya inhaled sharply, a sound between shock and heartbreak, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something brave rise inside her. She stepped forward. "No one needed to fix me," she said quietly. "I wasn't broken. You just didn't like that I wasn't. You." The monster-in-law's expression cracked, just slightly, but enough to reveal the deeper emotion underneath. Fear. Fear of losing authority. Fear of losing her position. Fear of a future where her son didn't orbit around her importance. Daniel continued, "Mom, you're paying for a new dress." Her face flushed with outrage. "Excuse me, you heard me," he said. "Every dollar, every seam, every replacement cost. You caused it, and you will take responsibility for it." A murmur ran through the room, relatives exchanging looks. Whispers starting and dying in the same breath. Social pressure is a powerful force in families like this, and she felt it. "You can't be serious," she hissed. "I'm completely serious," he replied. "And if you refuse, you won't attend the wedding." That was the moment. The real break. The crack that echoed louder than scissors ever could. "You would exclude your own mother from your wedding?" she asked, voice trembling with disbelief or manipulation. Sometimes those two sound identical. Daniel didn't flinch. "I would exclude anyone who hurts Maya." The room exhaled collectively, as if absorbing the shockwave. Her eyes darted around the space, looking for an ally, a sibling, a cousin, an uncle. But no one moved. Not because they hated her, but because they had heard enough, seen enough, and understood enough to know she had crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over with charm or excuses. She opened her mouth, maybe to plead, maybe to explode, but nothing came out. Silence swallowed her whole. And in that silence, Maya reclaimed everything she'd lost. Later that afternoon, we drove to a boutique recommended by the resort. Maya tried on a new gown, simpler than the first, softer, but somehow even more perfect for her. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Daniel's breath caught. The sales consultant's eyes welled. Even I wasn't immune to the moment. "You look like yourself," I said. She met her reflection in the mirror and nodded. "I do." Her new dress didn't carry the weight of destruction. It carried the weight of survival. When she walked down the aisle the next day, every guest rose. Daniel cried openly. And the monster-in-law, she stood near the back, not by choice, but because they placed her there intentionally, away from the center, away from control. Poetic justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And that day, it whispered through every step Maya took, toward a future the monster couldn't sabotage. Still, as powerful as that wedding was, it wasn't the most shocking case I handled that season. Because the next bride, her dress wasn't destroyed by scissors or by wine. It was destroyed because the monster-in-law wore it, and that truth unraveled a story far darker than anything I'd seen before. I knew something was wrong the second the zipper refused to move. Not because it didn't fit Sienna, the dress had fit her perfectly during every fitting, but because the tension in the seam felt unfamiliar. Fabric has its own language, its own memory. After years of handling gowns, I can tell when a dress has been mishandled just by closing a zipper. And this one resisted with a stiffness that didn't match Sienna's body at all. She stood in front of the mirror, hands twisting nervously. "Is it me?" she whispered. "Did I gain weight? Did something change?" "No," I said instantly. "This isn't your body. Something happened to the dress." The fear that flashed across her eyes wasn't superficial. It was the fear of someone who has been gaslit for months by a woman determined to undermine her confidence. I had heard pieces of their dynamic already, the comparisons, the subtle comments, the backhanded compliments. But I hadn't seen the full picture. Not yet. "Turn around," I told her gently. She did, and that's when I saw it, faint stretching at the seams, fabric warped slightly out of its original structure. The unmistakable stress lines caused when someone tries to force a garment several sizes too small for them. The dress wasn't damaged because it didn't fit the bride. It was damaged because it had fit someone else. Someone who had no business putting it on. Before I said anything, Sienna's voice cracked. "She touched it, didn't she?" I didn't have proof yet, but I didn't need it to understand the pattern. Some mothers destroy by accident. Some destroy by force. And some destroy by envy, the kind of envy that ages like rust, eating through everything it touches. That night, Boston churned in a cold wind outside the hotel windows. But inside the bridal suite, everything felt hot and claustrophobic. This wasn't the delicate sabotage of a spilled drink or the surgical malice of scissors. This was intimate, violating, personal. Only someone who wanted to be the bride would dare slip into her dress. "Tell me what happened yesterday," I asked. Sienna wrapped her arms around herself as if she needed to hold her body together while speaking. She kept asking questions about the gown. She asked how much it cost, how long the alterations took, whether I'd considered something more flattering. Flattering how? "More like what she wore at her wedding," Sienna whispered. She kept showing me old photos of herself in her gown, the same photo over and over, posing, twirling, smiling, like she wanted me to say she looked better. I exhaled slowly. Competition, not guidance, not tradition, not concern. A woman competing with the bride for beauty, attention, validation, a psychological pattern more corrosive than jealousy itself. She asked if you were uncomfortable with the dress. I asked. "Yes," Sienna said. But every time I said I loved it, she'd sigh, or tilt her head. Or say, "Well, some women can pull off that silhouette." Some women. Weaponized ambiguity. The favorite tool of a monster-in-law who wants to undermine self-esteem without leaving fingerprints. Earlier that morning, Sienna had arrived at the hotel early. The boutique venue's bridal suite was elegant, minimalist, all soft whites and champagne lighting. But when she unzipped the garment bag, the dress felt wrong, heavy in places, crinkled in others, and the zipper felt strained, almost tired. "Emily," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I knew before you even touched it, something wasn't right." And she was correct. I bent closer, examining the stitch under direct light. The fibers along the zipper had been forced open, not ripped, but pulled past their natural limit. The kind of damage that happens when someone tries to squeeze into a dress several sizes too small and refuses to stop. I stood up straight. "Sienna," I said quietly, "this didn't happen by accident. Someone wore your dress." Her breath caught like she'd been punched. "It was her," she whispered. "It has to be." A knock interrupted us. One of the hotel managers stood outside the suite, eyes uneasy. "Emily, may I speak with you privately?" My stomach tightened. I recognized that tone. It was the tone of someone holding information no one wants to share, but knows they must. We stepped into the hallway and he closed the door gently behind us. I didn't know if I should say anything, he began, but one of our staff reported something odd last night. I nodded slowly, urging him to continue. A woman came into the bridal suite floor after hours. She wasn't on the guest list for keycard access, but she claimed she was the bride's mother and needed to check something with the dress. My pulse quickened. What time? Close to midnight, he said. Midnight, when the hallways were empty, when the staff was minimal. When sabotage thrives, he continued, lowering his voice. The staff member saw her carrying a garment bag, not yours, but one she must have taken from the suite. She went into the restroom area, and she stayed there a long time. How long? Maybe 20, 25 minutes? The exact amount of time it would take to undress, struggle into a gown that doesn't fit, admire herself in it, and struggle out of it again. My jaw tightened. And when she came out, I asked. She was sweating, he said, like she'd been wrestling with something, and she looked satisfied. Satisfied. The same expression the first monster wore after spilling wine, the same expression the second monster wore after tearing lace. These women didn't just sabotage, they savored it. Why didn't she report it? I asked. She was scared, he admitted. The woman was intimidating, and she threatened to complain to management if anyone interfered. Of course she did. Threats are as natural to these monsters as breathing. When I returned to the suite, Sienna was seated on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, eyes red but determined. It was her, she said again. I felt it. But hearing you say it, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Violation rarely comes with violence. Sometimes it comes wrapped in entitlement, in a body squeezing itself into a dress that doesn't belong to it, in the audacity to occupy someone else's moment. Emily, she whispered, why would she do this? I thought about the photos she'd shown Sienna, the nostalgia, the vanity, the performative sadness over her slimmer days. I thought about the way she commented on her own beauty, her own wedding, her own glory. She wasn't trying to sabotage the dress, I said softly. She was trying to replace you. A knock echoed again. This time it wasn't staff, it was Mark. And the look on his face told me he already suspected the truth, but hadn't yet gathered the courage to face it. Emily, he said, voice low. I just spoke with the night manager. He told me someone used my mom's name to get onto this floor. Sienna's breath shook. She wore the dress, he whispered. Didn't she? The truth sat between them like a living thing. You need to see something, I told him. Something that confirms it. Because somewhere in this hotel, tucked inside a security folder, there was footage that would expose everything. And once they saw it, nothing about their family would ever be the same again. The moment Mark asked whether his mother had worn the dress, the air in the suite seemed to compress. Sienna didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything, the fear, the humiliation, the strange mixture of betrayal and disbelief. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, trying to absorb a truth that his upbringing had never prepared him to face. He stopped near the window, staring out at the Boston skyline, glowing faintly through the glass. I know she can be intense, he said quietly. But this is different. This is violation, I finished for him. He nodded, swallowing hard. If this is true, I want to know. I need to know. There are moments in wedding work when you stop being a planner and start being something closer to a detective, collecting stories, reading behaviors, piecing together timelines. And in this case, everything pointed toward one answer. But a truth like this shouldn't rely on instinct alone. It needed proof. Come with me, I said. Both of you. We left the suite and walked down the hallway toward the security office. The manager was already waiting. He had anticipated this moment from the minute he reported the unusual activity. You could see it in the way he held his key card, as if unlocking that door meant unlocking a truth he wasn't entirely comfortable with. He opened the security room, and the hum of monitors wrapped around us like white noise. Multiple screens glowed with grainy footage from hallways and elevators. Behind the monitors, a young security officer adjusted her headset nervously when she saw us enter. "This is the couple," the manager told her. "We need the footage from last night. 11th floor, bridal suite hallway." The officer nodded, tapping quickly through folders, timestamp filters, motion-triggered clips. And then she froze. "Is this it?" she asked softly. On the monitor, the image flickered, a figure stepping out of the elevator. At 11:47 p.m., a woman, mid-50s, elegant coat, confident stride. Sienna gripped the back of Mark's sleeve. "That's her," she whispered. The monster-in-law didn't hesitate as she walked down the hall, moving with a deliberate certainty that made my chest tighten. A woman on a mission. A woman who believed the space belonged to her. The footage zoomed automatically as the camera detected movement. We watched her pause outside the bridal suite door, glance around the hallway to ensure she was alone, then use a key card she should not have possessed. "She said she forgot something," the officer murmured. "But the camera shows she didn't walk out with anything except the dress." We watched as she slipped into the suite and the door shut behind her. Mark exhaled shakily. "Fast forward it," the officer complied. Minutes passed on the timestamp. 5, 10, 15, 20. At exactly 12:08 a.m., the door finally opened. The monster-in-law emerged, hair tousled, breathing heavy, cheeks flushed with exertion. In one hand, she carried the garment bag, though noticeably fuller than when she'd entered. The shape of the dress inside was distorted, wrinkled, deflated in the wrong places, and the zipper panel bulged slightly, as if stretched beyond its structure. Even through the grainy footage, you could see satisfaction on her face, a disturbing, triumphant satisfaction. She adjusted the bag under her arm and walked briskly back toward the elevator. As she stepped inside, she paused, looked at her reflection in the mirrored panel, and smiled. A small, subtle smile. The kind a person wears when they believe they've just reclaimed something they felt slipping away. Sienna gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. Mark closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something inside him had changed. He wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't torn. He wasn't making excuses. He was angry. And beneath the anger, heartbreak, she actually wore it, he whispered. "She wore your dress." Sienna didn't speak. She couldn't. Her body trembled, but her face stayed still, a stillness that comes only from the deepest kind of emotional injury. "Run the hallway footage inside the restrooms," I said quietly. The officer hesitated. "We don't have cameras inside, of course, but we have the hallway outside the private lounge." She clicked another file. There she was, the monster-in-law slipping discreetly into the luxurious restroom area, often used by bridal parties. She carried the garment bag held low, like a thief guarding stolen treasure. She stayed inside for 26 minutes. When she exited, her coat was slightly shifted, like she'd hurriedly thrown it back on. Her hair was fluffed, her makeup subtly retouched, and she walked with an air of smugness that made every one of us recoil internally. This was not impulsive behavior. This was identity theft, dressed up as nostalgia. Mark stepped back from the monitor, as if physically ill. "I can't believe this. I can't believe yes," I said gently. "She did." "What kind of person puts on someone else's wedding dress?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. "A person who believes the wedding is about her," I replied. "A person who can't stand that the spotlight moved on. A person who thinks the bride's beauty threatens her legacy." Sienna let out a sob, not dramatic, not loud, but the kind that tears something inside you on the way out. Mark wrapped his arms around her instantly, holding her like someone holding shattered glass, careful, protective, furious at what caused the break. "She always talked about her wedding," Sienna whispered against his shoulder. "She always compared us. I never thought she'd go this far. I should have seen it," Mark murmured. I should have stopped it before it got this far. This isn't your fault, I said firmly. People who go this deep into their own delusions hide it well. Mothers like her build entire worlds around their self-image, and anyone who threatens that image becomes an enemy. Mark straightened, wiping tears from Sienna's cheek. His expression sharpened with a clarity I'd rarely seen in grooms facing family sabotage. Where is she now? The manager replied, she asked for a late breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Hasn't left yet. Sienna's breath hitched. I don't want to see her alone. You won't, Mark said. He threaded his fingers through hers, steady and sure. We're doing this together. As we left the security office, the weight of what was about to happen filled the hallway. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning, a collapse of delusion. A mother being forced to face the reality she spent years dodging. And as we approached the restaurant, I felt the atmosphere shift, that same electric stillness right before a storm breaks. Because no matter how a monster-in-law justifies her actions, no matter how deeply she believes she owns the narrative, there is nothing more powerful than being confronted by the truth she thought she buried. And Mark was walking straight toward her with the truth in hand. The restaurant was quiet in the late morning, the kind of calm that feels artificial, polished silverware, soft jazz, the faint smell of pastries and espresso floating through the air. But beneath that elegance, something darker brewed. You could feel it. The tension wasn't visible, but it pulsed in the space between each table, waiting to erupt. Mark spotted her instantly. His mother sat at a two-top near the window, sipping tea as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. She looked composed, almost serene, with that particular stillness people use when they believe they've regained control of a situation through silence. Her posture was flawless, her expression carefully neutral, her gaze calm enough to suggest innocence, but sharp enough to betray the calculation beneath it. She hadn't expected to be caught. She hadn't expected anyone to know. And she certainly hadn't expected her son to walk toward her with purpose instead of submission. The moment she saw us approaching, she placed her cup down slowly. "Sweetheart," she said, smiling softly. "You look tense. Is everything all right?" What amazed me wasn't her question, it was her confidence. The woman had slipped into another woman's wedding gown, stretched it, damaged it, violated the very symbol of her son's future marriage, and still believed she could smooth everything over with a smile and a tone soaked in false warmth. She didn't yet realize her act was over. Mark didn't sit. He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. He placed his phone on the table, screen down, and said, "We need to talk." The monster-in-law blinked, masking the micro-expression of unease that flickered for half a second. "Of course, dear. But must you speak like that? Guests might hear." "They should," he said. Her smile cracked. Sienna stood beside him. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. It was a quiet bravery, the kind you learn after being broken repeatedly and still choosing to stand. "I know what you did," Mark said. She tilted her head, keeping her voice airy. "What is this now?" "More accusations." "I told you both yesterday you misunderstood." He tapped the phone twice. The screen lit up. Her face whitened. "Before you lie again," he said. "You're going to watch this." He pressed play. The security footage began in silence. The elevator doors opening, the monster-in-law stepping out. Her confident stride across the hallway, her illegal access into the bridal suite. Her disappearance behind the door, the time stamp ticking. 11 minutes, 20 minutes, 26 minutes. Then her exit flushed, disheveled, smiling to herself as she carried the garment bag. She blinked rapidly when the image froze. A crack in her mask, a shiver in her poise. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for exits, physical or psychological, but there were none. Everyone saw her, everyone understood, everyone now knew, but still, she tried. "This is completely out of context," she said, forcing a laugh. "I only checked the dress. I wanted to surprise Sienna with an adjustment. Something to help her feel more stop." Mark's voice sliced through the room. "You wore it," he said. "You wore her dress." She inhaled sharply, but her denial was instant. "Don't be ridiculous. I wouldn't fit in that thing." "You didn't," he replied. "Which is why it's ruined." A few guests looked over. The room grew quieter, the jazz seeming to dull into background static. Mark continued, his voice steady, controlled. "You wanted to see what you looked like in it. You wanted to compare yourself to her. You wanted to insert yourself into our wedding in the most invasive way imaginable." The monster-in-law's composure shattered another inch. "I was trying to help. She chose a dress that doesn't suit her. It's too modern, too tight, too to what?" Sienna whispered. The woman didn't answer. For the first time, Sienna stepped forward. Not timid, not shrinking, but steady, as though she finally realized the only person who should feel ashamed was not her. "Why?" Sienna asked. "Why did you want to wear my dress?" No accusation, just truth, raw and vulnerable. The monster-in-law opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not because she didn't have a lie ready, but because she suddenly understood that this wasn't a private argument she could manipulate behind closed doors. It was a reckoning, witnessed, undeniable, irreversible. "I was only checking the fit," she finally whispered. Mark shook his head. "No, you weren't checking anything. You were taking something that didn't belong to you, something sacred." She clenched her jaw. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" he asked. "Because last night you replaced our seamstress. You humiliated my fiancé. You risked damaging the most important part of her wedding attire. You violated her privacy, and you lied about every part of it." Her eyes flashed with fury. "You're choosing her over me." There it was again, that poisoned sentence every monster eventually uses as their final defense. The sentence that reduces love to competition, marriage to betrayal, and motherhood to ownership. Mark didn't flinch. "I'm choosing what's right," he said. "You're my son," she snapped, voice cracking. "You owe me loyalty." "No," he said softly. "I owe you honesty, and here it is. If you cannot respect Sienna, you cannot be part of this wedding." The restaurant held its breath, her face twisted anger, shock, disbelief, all battling for dominance. She looked at Sienna, and for the first time, there was no pretense left in her expression, only resentment. Deep, burning resentment. "You manipulated him," she hissed. "No," Mark said. "You lost him." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was decisive. It was final. When the waiter approached cautiously to refill water at a nearby table, he hesitated, sensing the weight of something enormous unfolding. The entire room seemed frozen in place, the kind of stillness that precedes transformation. The monster-in-law finally stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. She pointed a trembling finger at Sienna. "You will regret this," she said. Sienna didn't look away. "No, I won't." The woman inhaled sharply, her rage simmering under her skin like a warning flare, but she said nothing else. She grabbed her purse, turned toward the exit, and walked out of the restaurant. Not triumphantly, not gracefully, not with power, but alone. And as the door closed behind her, the entire room seemed to exhale. Mark sank into the chair she'd vacated, elbows on the table, forehead resting in his hands. Sienna touched his shoulder gently, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" He looked up, eyes tired, but clear. "I will be. Now that I see her for who she really is." I watched them together, fragile, shaken, but united, and felt something settle in my chest. Not relief, not victory. Something deeper. Validation. Because in weddings, truth often hides behind illusions of family unity, of tradition, of loyalty. But once the illusion cracks, the truth comes rushing in like cold air. Later that evening, we took the dress to a specialist who worked miracles with torn seams. With time, patience, and skill, she restored the gown enough for Sienna to wear with pride. And when she walked down the aisle the next day, holding Mark's hand, her dress didn't look damaged anymore. It looked earned. But even as the ceremony unfolded beautifully, even as guests smiled and cried and clapped, one thought echoed quietly in the back of my mind. 3 dresses, 3 mothers, 3 attempts at destruction. And every single bride still walked down the aisle. Because weddings aren't about control, they're about choice. And boundaries. And the courage to protect your joy from anyone who tries to steal it. By the time all 3 weddings were behind me, my case files felt heavier than usual, not because of the budgets, or the timelines, or the contracts, but because of what each dress had been forced to carry. 3 gowns, 3 brides. 3 monsters-in-law who believed, in their own twisted way, that the day belonged to them. Sometimes I think if you laid those dresses side by side, even after the repairs and replacements, you could still feel the damage in the seams. The wine that had once soaked through Lauren's skirt, the scissor cuts that had turned Maya's train into ribbons, the stretched zipper that told the story of Sienna's stolen moment. You could almost read each dress like an X-ray of a family system. People think wedding sabotage is random, emotional, chaotic. But what I've learned, standing in these quiet bridal suites and overheated corridors, is that destruction like this is rarely impulsive. It's intentional, it's layered, and it always starts long before the dress is actually ruined. With Lauren, the monster plotted behind a glass of red wine and 3 months of criticism. She didn't just spill, she rehearsed. She wanted control over the image, the budget, the story. When she couldn't own the dress financially, she tried to own it symbolically by staining it so badly there'd be no choice but to start over. But she underestimated 2 things, the cameras and her son's breaking point. With Maya, the scissors weren't just tools. They were an extension of a belief system. Tradition as a weapon, modesty as a threat, heritage as a leash. That monster didn't attack the gown in a moment of rage. She scheduled its execution. She used money and values as a shield, convinced that no one would question a matriarch who claimed to be protecting the family's reputation. But in the end, she only exposed her own. And with Sienna, that wasn't sabotage of fabric. That was intrusion into identity. That monster didn't want to stain or slice. She wanted to wear. To insert herself into a narrative that no longer centered her. To measure her fading youth against the bride's moment and see if she still fit. When she walked into that bathroom with the dress and locked the door, she wasn't just disobeying boundaries. She was erasing them. 3 women, 3 different tactics. Control, tradition, competition, same core fear. Losing power. Losing status. Losing their sons to lives that weren't engineered by them. From the outside, people love to say it's just a dress. They don't understand that, in families like these, it never is. The dress becomes the battlefield for everything unspoken, who gets to be seen, who gets to be honored, who gets to hold the emotional wallet of the family. I've watched mothers weaponize wedding budgets like contracts. I've seen fake generosity used like a trap, every gift secretly an invoice for obedience. I've seen brides push themselves into debt just to avoid taking a single dollar from a woman they know will turn that money into leverage. I've watched grooms try to balance on the thin line between their upbringing and their future, until something snaps and they finally realize neutrality is just another form of surrender. What still amazes me, though, isn't the cruelty, it's the resilience. Because every single one of these brides walked down the aisle anyway. Lauren walked with a gown that carried the memory of red wine and a video that exposed the truth. She walked beside a groom who had finally told his mother no, and meant it. Her dress might have been restored in a rush, but her sense of worth was restored in something much stronger: boundaries. Maya walked in a new dress, paid for by the very woman who tried to erase the first one. Not because the monster suddenly understood the damage, but because her son called it what it was and refused to move forward without accountability. Her gown no longer represented a tradition forced onto her, it represented a future she had chosen for herself. And Sienna, she walked in a dress that almost wasn't there. A dress that had been stretched, almost broken, then carefully brought back to life. She didn't walk with illusions, she walked with clarity. She knew exactly who she was marrying, and she knew exactly who he had chosen not to be. I think about these 3 weddings more often than I should. Not because of the drama, although, yes, the chaos is unforgettable, but because of what they taught me about love and power. Love is fragile, but it is not weak. Power is loud, but it is not always strong. You can spill wine on silk, but you can't stain the truth forever. You can cut fabric into pieces, but you can't slice your way into someone else's soul. You can force your body into a dress that doesn't belong to you, but you can't force the world to pretend it fits. There is always a moment in every one of these weddings where the decision shifts. When a groom stops asking, "How do I keep everyone happy?" and starts asking, "Who am I willing to lose in order to protect the person I chose?" When a bride stops wondering, "Am I being too sensitive?" and starts realizing, "No, I've been underreacting this entire time." And when a monster-in-law stops pretending she is the victim because everyone finally sees her as the architect. From my side of things, as a planner, I can coordinate flowers, timelines, seating charts, contracts, deposit schedules, cost breakdowns. I can fix late deliveries. I can keep the bar stocked and the music on time. What I can't do is make a mother choose kindness over control. But I can do what I did in all 3 of these stories: notice, document, show the truth to the people who need to see it most, and quietly help the bride build a day that belongs to her again. I once had someone ask me, after all this, "Why do you still plan weddings?" The answer is simple. Because for every monster who sees a dress as a weapon, there is a bride who still dares to see it as hope. Because for every mother who tries to claim the day as hers, there is a couple willing to reclaim it. Because no matter how many gowns get stained, shredded, or stretched, love keeps showing up at the end of the aisle anyway. And honestly, the moment when a bride takes that first step after everything is the moment that makes all of it worth it. So now I'll leave you with this. You've heard about the red wine, the scissors, and the stolen dress. You've seen 3 different versions of the same obsession with control. Which monster-in-law do you think crossed the line the most? Tell me in the comments, and if you want to hear more true wedding stories like these, stay with me. I have more cases in my file